In Seventh-day Adventism, what do the terms progressive and conservative mean?
Well, thanks, Miles. That's a huge question. Of course, they meant something quite different at the time of the 1919 Bible Conference than they do today. And, Adventism has become so pluralistic today that that would be a whole different subject for me to talk about what progressive means to various Adventists today. But going back to the 1919 Bible Conference and the beginning of the 20th century, the last half of the 19th century, I think it's important to understand that Adventists were not the same as progressive or modernists in the religious world in general and the Protestant world in general. You had many, quotes, progressive liberals that were debunking the Bible, demythologizing Scripture, taking the work of Bultmann, etc. And there really weren't any Adventists that would fall into that category at the time of the 1919 Bible Conference. There were certainly some that had a more liberal view of the Bible than some inerrancy or fundamentalism that was typical of a lot of Adventists. But, I think the most important use of these terms, have to do with Ellen White, because that's the subculture of Adventism. That was the real crux of what was going on, is how was Ellen White viewed? And how the Bible was viewed was always viewed in relation to how Ellen White was viewed. And it's very important to understand that the 1919 Bible Conference was the most important series of meetings ever conducted in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It was really the one chance, the one opportunity for the progressives, those who recognized that what the church had taught about Ellen White was simply not true. It didn't stand up to facts. It didn't stand up to the historical sources. And to have the General Conference president himself, along with the top scholars and leaders in the church, recognizing this, was a one-time only opportunity for the church to really attempt to move into a honest direction, or at least a more honest direction, because the church had always been involved with dishonesty from its very beginning. Ellen was involved with dishonesty, and so was James. The whole first 7 years with the shut door and all the date setting and their deletions. And Ellen and James were such powerful figures in Adventism. James was conference president most of the years that after the church was organized until his death. And of course, Ellen was saying that the General Conference was the voice of God during that time. When James wasn't GC president, then she changed that. God then showed her that it was no longer the voice of God, conveniently for the Whites. But even after James' death in 1881, Ellen White was a very strong, powerful political figure. People completely underestimate what a political figure this woman was. And leaders were scared of her for good reason. She would hang them out to dry and destroy them if they dared to really doubt or question her authority. And so leaders were afraid of her. And that included A.G. Daniels. But the difference is that Daniels plotted with Ellen for 10 years when they were in Australia together to come back and take over the General Conference. Ellen felt that she had been betrayed, being sent to Australia. She wrote President Olson, who she had been in favor of, a letter telling him that it wasn't God's will, that he had failed in terms of God's will in sending her to Australia. And her and Daniels both had a real axe to grind against the General Conference, against the Adventist leadership. And they plotted over this 10-year period to come back and take over the General Conference. And that's precisely what they did. When they came back, Ellen gave her big speech to the pre-session of the General Conference. She's lined out everything that her and Daniels had put together. Daniels was the hand-picked General Conference president. And so Ellen and Daniels really benefited each other in tremendous ways. Ellen really needed the support of a GC president like Daniels, and Daniels really needed the support of the prophet. And those two came through for each other in tremendous ways. And so Daniels was one of the longest serving GC presidents as a result of that. But Daniels also knew Ellen White very well. They were close personal friends. He knew the truth about her visions and how the church had completely misrepresented who she was and what her visions were. And he wasn't about to stand up and take that position while Ellen was alive. But when she died in 1915, Daniels, Prescott, all the leading thinkers in the Adventist church said, you know, we've got to do something about this problem. We have to address this deceptive and very false view of Ellen White that the church has been given. And, you know, they selected the 1919 Bible Conference to address a whole bunch of issues, but really all of these issues were related to Ellen White in one way, shape, or form when you study it carefully. And I wrote my master's thesis in history on this very subject. I was interested that, you know, Michael Campbell advertises his book as the untold story of the 1919 conference and the move to Adventist fundamentalism. But he never even references my master's thesis in history, which was twice as large as his book and specifically dealt with the topic. It was the higher criticism fundamentalist debate in 19th century American religion as it impacted Seventh-day Adventism and Ellen G. White. So he doesn't even reference the book, which says a lot about his scholarship as a historian when he's claiming to write the untold story on the subject. But let me just quickly quote from page 72 of my thesis, a paper by Bert Holoviak, who was the GC archivist, the great historian. And he wrote a great paper called Pioneers, Pantheists, and Progressives. And this will shed a lot of light on your question. The pioneers, of course, were the conservatives. These were people who believed Ellen White was inerrant. Everything she wrote was straight from God, as she claimed. So you can't really blame them for believing this, because this is what Ellen White said again and again and again. I've delineated all these quotes and claims by her, which are just completely outrageous. But that's what these pioneers believed. And these were the leading pioneers, conservatives: George Irwin, Stephen Haskell, J.N. Loughborough, R.A. Underwood, G.I. Butler, O.A. Johnson, Uriah Smith, F.C. Gilbert, J.S. Washburn, and G.B. Starr. These were like obviously there were many more, but these were like the most notable names. Then you had the progressives, which were much more liberal in their view of Ellen White and much more realistic, I might add. And that was A.G. Daniels, W.W. Prescott, W.A. Spicer, C.L. Taylor, C.M. Sorensen, F.M. Wilcox, H.C. Lacey, G.B. Thompson, D.A. Parsons, B.L. House. And most of these people were the most dominant and influential speakers at the 1919 Bible Conference. And then you had the Pantheists, and this is a misnomer, of course. Kellogg was not a pantheist, and none of these other people would have claimed to be pantheists. But because these were all people who came to question the visions and authority of Ellen White, this was the label that Adventism chose for them. And so at the head of the list, of course, was Kellogg. But then you had A.T. Jones, E.J. Wagner, A.F. Ballinger, J.W. Scholes, William Hutchinson, Harry Champness, A.R. Leask, S.S. David, and L.H. Chrysler. So this is a great paper by Holoviak, and people who are really interested in this whole subject of conservatives, progressives, what was going on prior and at the 1919 conference, really need to read that. And they should really read my master's thesis, because that goes into a lot more detail than, what Campbell does. And Campbell's book's only about 118 pages, and my thesis was over 200 pages just on that subject. But, the bottom line was that even with the people that were labeled as pantheists were not liberals in the sense of Boltman or demythologizing the Bible or any of that kind of thing. So Adventist subculture is really a world unto itself compared to Protestant America. We have to understand that. And there did come a lot of overlap in the creation evolution debates. And I go into that in my thesis quite a bit. F.D. Nickel kind of became a star in Adventism by arguing for a 6,000-year Earth, and he had big debates with Maynard Shipley up in San Francisco that were in the newspaper, and that was kind of the prerequisite, or the big debate before the Scopes trial. So Nickel did a pretty good job for himself, and he kind of became a superstar in Adventism as the fundamentalist. And then he became the super apologist for Ellen White. And I have documented in my books how he's a dishonest apologist. He's a very smart guy. He knows how to lie. He knows how to deceive. He knows how to misrepresent source documentation while he's claiming to rely on source documentation. And I demonstrate very clearly how he is guilty of misusing and lying about those documents and leaving out conveniently all the documents that make a fool of his argument.